everybody. Happy 4th of July weekend. We have a great one today, for a change. And this time I actually mean it. Because Marc Elias is back. Marc of the Democracy Docket is our favorite election lawyer, and he's always great. Tough subjects today. Marc and I will be discussing the courts and Trump's relentless attacks on law firms, on universities, and on immigrants. But I wanted to talk about something that Marc and I didn't discuss, and that is the horrific bill that Congress just passed. In short, it's inhumane. The big, beautiful bill is a huge gift to corporations and the most affluent, and an enormous blow to low-income Americans. The millionaires and billionaires will make out like bandits and drive up our debt another $3 to $4 trillion. These figures are from the Congressional Budget Office. And by the way, the Congressional Budget Office is chosen by the party in power. And since both houses are in the hands of Republicans, know that the scoring comes from these Republican experts. And they are acknowledging that this bill will add at least $3.3 trillion to our national debt. To put this in perspective, just the interest on our debt will now be more than our entire defense budget. Look at the cuts. Nearly $1 trillion to Medicaid, which will leave 17 million people uninsured, along with the cuts to the Affordable Care Act. Billions from SNAP will cut food assistance from tens of millions of folks that need it. And, like kids. You know who benefited from food stamps as a child? J.D. Vance. I mean, how cruel can this guy get to deny others the exact thing that helped him? We're talking about food for people who can't otherwise afford it. And by reversing the Inflation Reduction Act, which was largely funding for a national clean energy program, we lose more than $400 billion in clean energy investment in wind and solar and incentives to buy electric vehicles, which means more gas and oil and pollution and smog and asthma and global warming. This past election was a disaster, and they're making us pay for it. They're making us pay for it with this bill. The midterms are over a year away, but we have to start building now. This is why I continue fundraising for progressive candidates and causes with my PAC, Midwest Values PAC. You can learn more about our work at midwestvaluespac.org. Anyway, we got a great one today with Marc Elias, and this time, I finally mean it. I'm going to start off by talking about 60 Minutes. You were back in May on 60 Minutes to discuss a story they're doing on Trump targeting law firms. So you were the only lawyer who he kind of named who agreed to be on 60 Minutes.
Correct. They came and approached me and said, we think we want to do a program about Donald Trump's attacking lawyers. And will you talk to us? So I had several conversations with their producer just on the phone or on Zoom and sort of explained what I thought was going on and why I thought this was terrible. And they said, would you be willing to be on camera? And I said, look, I've done 60 Minutes before. And my experience is they record, between from the point you show up to the point you leave, it's like 3 hours. And ultimately they use 90 seconds. And so, Al, you were in show business, so you'll tell me that that's actually not unusual, that there's a lot of waiting around.
Well, they have a high budget, so
this seemed like just a lot of time for. And so I told them, why don't you find another lawyer who is still at a large law firm, because they're targeting large law firms, and use them instead. And I gave them some recommendations. They ultimately came back and said that they could not find a single lawyer
willing to do it, basically.
Willing to do it. And the concern was that if I didn't do it, they might actually not air the episode because they needed, some lawyer to do it. And so I said, fine, I'll do it. And, they said it'll be quicker. It was not that much quicker, though they did use more of the time.
Sure. I thought it turned out well.
It turned out well. Yeah. And I'm happy I did it. And I'm glad that 60 Minutes had the guts to to stand by.
Now, again, this was about the firms that Trump went after, and some of them capitulated and some of them didn't. The first one was Paul Weiss.
Yeah. So what happened is, the Donald Trump's targeted a series of law firms. The first one that he targeted was Perkins Coie, my former law firm. He targeted them because I had been a partner there, which, even though I was no longer a partner there, that was his reason for targeting them. And Perkins Coie fought. The next law firm that he targeted was Paul Weiss, and he targeted them because there was a lawyer named Mark Pomerantz who had been a partner there before going to the Manhattan DA's office, and everyone assumed Paul Weiss would also fight, right? I mean, after all, Paul Weiss is a storied New York firm. It is the first major law firm in New York City that had Jewish and non-Jewish lawyers working together. So it was like the first integrated law firm in New York.
In a law firm, that's considered integrated.
Yes. It also then, I think, made the first Black partner. I don't want to get that wrong. I think it may have made the first Black partner in a large New York City law firm as well. Like, it had a very storied history. And it also was very well politically connected. You had a lot of Democrats and liberals prominent in the Democratic Party who had practiced law there or were practicing law there.
So it doesn't seem like a firm that would fold.
And then it folded.
Yeah.
And it capitulated, and it made a deal, and that set a precedent that 8 further large law firms followed. 4 law firms have fought. All of them have won in court. 9 law firms have capitulated and made deals.
And agreed to do a lot of pro bono work.
Yes, Donald Trump totaled it up at one point and said it was $1 billion, which it seems to be just shy of $1 billion. So, as usual, Donald Trump like rounding up, but yeah, has agreed to do hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of pro bono legal work
on subjects that he wanted.
Right. So, this is one of these places where the law firms, have tried to wiggle and squirm and be like, well, of course, we're going to apply our normal screens. Nonsense. Donald Trump expects them to do what he wants. And they have already sold themselves to Donald Trump. They've already made their deal with this guy, and they will get what they deserve.
So what do you see as the danger of these firms folding?
Look, I think that the danger is threefold. The first is just pure rule of law, right? Like, you cannot have an administration held accountable in court if you do not have law firms willing to sue him. You cannot have the Constitution defended if you don't have lawyers willing to take cases. Immigrants, poor people who can't afford lawyers rely on pro bono legal services, and large law firms carry a large part of that weight. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we've just seen a lot of capitulation by large institutions, and law firms are large institutions. So are universities, Columbia, Harvard, have been targeted. So are large media companies. ABC paid a large settlement, as have other media companies. But we have seen capitulation by large organizations, and that capitulation begets capitulation. And then the third is that if you believe that in the long run, the thing that will either save us or delay the problems of our march towards authoritarianism is the ability of the courts to do their jobs, you need to not have lawyers who are pulling their punches.
And the courts are standing up for the law firms, or have, that didn't cave, and also some for Harvard.
They are. Yeah, look, the truth is the Trump administration is having a terrible go of it in court. They are losing an extraordinarily large number of cases. People have focused, and Al, you and I have talked about this, about how many cases Donald Trump lost in the aftermath of the 2020 election. His administration is losing cases all over the place. There was an academic who did a study in the month of May. The Trump administration lost 95% of the lawsuits it was involved in at the district court level. So you are seeing the courts doing a lot. Now, the Supreme Court made that a little harder last week, so that's not great. But yeah.
Well, let's talk about Supreme Court decisions. The birthright citizenship decision.
Yeah.
This actually didn't decide the fate of Trump's executive order to change the definition of birthright citizenship. Right? Under the 14th Amendment, basically all persons born in the United States are United States citizens. And that seems pretty straightforward. The Constitution was amended to include it, and it seems unlikely that, don't you think it's unlikely the court will reverse that?
Yeah, Donald Trump's position is preposterous and it will not prevail.
But what this decision came down to was that the district courts,
They couldn't issue universal injunctions.
yeah. So tell us what that means.
Okay, so think of it this way. If you are someone who was born in the United States, but Donald Trump has decided that he is going to concoct a theory that says, notwithstanding the fact you were born in the United States, you are not a citizen, okay, which is essentially what he's trying to do. You could go to court and you could say, this is unconstitutional. I'm entitled to be a citizen. And if you win, that injunction against that interpretation of the law would typically be that the Trump administration can't take away anyone's citizenship, right? The question's been brought, it's been tested, and there is an injunction against the administration then doing the same thing to your neighbor or to someone in another state. What the Supreme Court said is that is not how this is going to work anymore. That district courts can no longer issue injunctive relief beyond the relief needed for the party standing in front of them. Now, the injunction can be broad enough to encompass full relief for that individual or group, but it doesn't apply on a universal basis. It doesn't apply on a nationwide basis. It just applies to that individual. Now, in some areas of the law, this will have relatively little impact. But as in the case of immigration, as you can imagine, the idea that we're going to have millions of individuals bringing individual lawsuits is a recipe for chaos and is also never going to happen. So we're now in this very sort of uncertain place about like how this all shakes out.
So can a circuit court put out an injunction that covers the whole circuit?
So this is a great question. Like there are obviously you could ask that question about the circuit court. You could ask that question about the U.S. Supreme Court. The majority opinion, which was joined by the 6 conservatives, right? The 3 more liberal justices dissented. But the 6 justice opinion written by Justice Comey Barrett is a little vague on that point. Like it kind of doesn't really say. Justice Kavanaugh wrote separately to say, oh, this doesn't apply to the US Supreme Court. This applies to everybody else, but not us.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't address the Court of Appeals, but he says basically, don't worry, it doesn't apply to us. If we grant relief, it's universal. It's not clear why that would be the case, but that's what he says. But of course, his opinion was only signed by him. And so you don't really know how the 5 votes of a coalition come together in how this actually plays out under a variety of circumstances, one of which being what happens at the Court of Appeals, what happens if a state is a plaintiff, right? If the state of Minnesota brings a case and says, look, this affects us in our state because we have to issue birth certificates, we have to issue all these other documents, and therefore we need relief for everyone in our state. I think everyone agrees that it would apply to everyone in Minnesota. What does it mean for someone who was born in Minnesota, though, and moved to Missouri? What does it mean for someone from Missouri who's now living in Minnesota? In other words, could Minnesota get nationwide relief on the grounds that that is necessary to give it full relief? So we don't know the answer to a lot of questions about this. We just know that there has been a significant development that is not good.
Can a class action work? That's another wrinkle, right?
The majority opinion mentions 2 things. It says class action lawsuits. It also says that, you may have representative standing. What if the AFL-CIO brings standing on behalf of all its members? So you could have a class action lawsuit, you could have representative standing. And presumably that is available because it's in the majority opinion, although the conservatives wrote a separate concurrence saying basically we're going to have to look at that and how to tighten those things to make sure that not too many people are able to use them.
Okay, let's keep going on in the weeds a little bit. Louisiana redistricting case.
Yeah.
Now, that was supposed to come up this term, right?
Yeah. So this is a very unusual circumstance. The state of Louisiana redistricted after the 2020 census. They drew 1 rather than 2 majority Black districts or Black opportunity districts. They got sued. They lost. And the state of Louisiana was forced to draw a new map with 2 Black opportunity districts, which they did. Elections were held in 2024 under that new map. There are now 2 candidates who have been elected, 2 members of Congress who were elected, who are African-American candidates of choice. A bunch of white voters then brought a lawsuit saying this violates our rights because this is a racial gerrymander. And I was frankly quite surprised that the Supreme Court took this case for argument, but they did. They held oral argument. There was briefing, there was argument. And as we got to the last day of the term, we were all expecting, okay, we're going to get the decision in this Louisiana redistricting case. And as the opinions kept coming down, everyone's like, oh, it must be the Chief Justice is going to issue the decision because he issues his opinions last. That's the protocol of the court. And then all of a sudden, we get to the end and no Louisiana. And instead, we're told that the Louisiana case is held over to next term. It's going to be rebriefed and re-argued with likely a change in the question presented. In other words, the legal issue that they will argue will be brought.
Now, is that like were you like a Citizens United thing?
Correct. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Al, because the last time I can recall that this happened was actually in Citizens United, where the Supreme Court heard a case about whether pay-per-view movies were covered by the campaign finance laws. That case got argued. And at the end of the term, the Supreme Court said, oh, wait, we don't actually want to decide a case about pay-per-view movies. We want to decide a case about whether corporate spending is in total legal if it's independent.
Far afield from the original arguments.
Correct. And so they ordered the parties to brief that issue, even though that was not the issue in the court in the case below. And we know how that turned out.
The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a campaign finance case in the upcoming term, the National Republican Senatorial Committee versus the Federal Election Commission. Do you know this one?
I know this case very well. So, and in fact, the Department of Justice has declined to defend the law, which has been on the books since the early 1970s and has withstood constitutional challenge in the Supreme Court before. Trump's Justice Department said, we're not going to defend the law.
So who will take this up? Is it the Federal Election Commission or who will
No, so
argue
this case is before the Supreme Court, and my law firm filed a motion to intervene on behalf of the National Democratic Party, the three national party committees. And so the Democratic parties were granted intervention to defend this law. At issue is whether or not the limits on party coordinated expenditures is constitutional. There is a limit on the total amount of money that the DSCC or the DCCC or the DNC and their three counterparts on the Republican side, how much money they can spend in full coordination with their candidates. The Republican Party has been trying to strike these limits down literally since the mid-1980s. They have failed before, but they are back trying to again.
Is this about getting more dark money into elections?
It's not dark money, right? This is money that goes into the National Party Committee. So it is disclosed money.
Okay.
But it is allowing them to spend more. It is allowing the national parties to coordinate more of their spending.
So you're part of that case.
Elias Law Group, my law firm, is representing the DNC, the DSCC, the DCCC in defending the law.
Here's one that your folks sent me some stuff, and this one I don't quite get. This is the DOJ and Maryland federal judges.
Yeah.
This is the DOJ is suing every federal judge in Maryland.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
This is like a parody, right? I mean, like
has this happened before? Ever?
No, I mean, not that I'm aware of. Like this is not. It's not usually a thing that if you don't like the way courts are ruling, you get to sue all the judges, which is what they've done. Mm-hmm. They've basically said that they don't like the fact that the Maryland judges have agreed that whenever a petition for habeas corpus comes in from a migrant who is going to be sent out of the country, they are going to put in place an automatic stay that prevents the deportation for 48 hours so that the court has a chance to rule on the petition before the person is scurried out of the country.
And we've seen this issue arise in very nasty ways.
Correct. Now, it is obscene that the Department of Justice has been scurrying people out of the country to prevent judges from ruling. But alas, that is the world in which we now live. I mean, that is in itself a national scandal. That's what the Trump administration is doing, and that DOJ has gone along with it. But because they don't like this is happening in Maryland, they are not appealing that order. They are literally suing the judges. They're literally like, okay, Your Honor, we're suing you. Mm-hmm. And so, my position is the judges should dismiss this case out of hand and should sanction the lawyers and the people behind the lawsuit. Because if the judiciary doesn't start standing up for itself a little stronger, against this nonsense, it's not gonna get better.
One of the things I'm interested in is that this happened just after the Supreme Court had ruled that immigrants could be sent with very little notice to a country that they're not from.
Correct.
What was the court's reasoning for that decision?
What was the Supreme Court's decision? We don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't tell us. They just issued an order. So we actually don't know the reason why they said that
Really?
was okay. But again, the judges in Maryland are saying, look, we understand that, these migrants may be deportable. They may be able to legally be sent abroad. But we as judges need 48 hours to read the pleadings. Like we literally need some time to hear the arguments.
Right.
And so all we're asking for is 48 hours. Okay, not 48 days, 48 hours. And the Trump Justice Department literally, not like I said, they didn't appeal that. They literally sued the judges. I mean, it's crazy.
How long is that case going to take?
Well, so again, Al, this is the thing that I'm worried about. The answer is they should throw the case in the garbage. Like they should say, dismissed. Like, no, you don't get to do this. Like, Al, here's the thing. A lot of people, some of whom are quite troubled, regularly send letters and other things to federal courthouses and to federal judges claiming all kinds of crazy conspiracies. Radio waves are controlling their mind and they want to sue the Pope. And when judges and courts get them, they don't treat them as serious lawsuits. We need to start understanding that Donald Trump has his lawyers, government and private, file those kinds of lawsuits. Okay, and so I understand the inclination of judges is to say, well, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit. It's a crazy lawsuit. Don't give it the respect that Donald Trump wants you to, and thereby legitimize it.
In a piece in the Democracy Docket, you write, Trump knows that the greatest threat to his power is a devastating loss in the midterm elections. He knows the best way to secure Republican victories is through voter suppression and election subversion. What is the DOJ trying to do to encourage voter suppression?
So they are now like full partners in the Republican Party's plans. Gone are the days.
Of course.
Gone are the days in which the Department of Justice saw its job as protecting voting rights. Gone are even the days that you lamented back in the day of the Bush Justice Department, where they simply sat on the sidelines. Like we were all upset that they were not protecting voting rights. Oh no! This administration is actually actively filing lawsuits to help the Republican Party achieve its voter suppression goals. They file. You probably followed. There was a very long, contentious recount and election contest in North Carolina for state Supreme Court justice, where the Republican National Committee and the Republican candidate were trying to throw out 65,000 votes from North Carolinians. And they ultimately lost. We got involved. I didn't represent the candidate. I represented outside groups. And we ultimately won the case, so it didn't happen. But the RNC put a lot of effort behind it. Well, guess what happened?
And the Democrat won the race.
The Democrat won the race. So right. Guess what happened now? The Department of Justice is now taking that same legal theory and sued North Carolina. Like literally, they picked up the RNC's losing legal theory and are like, oh, we're going to bring this lawsuit ourselves. And so they are doing the bidding of Republicans. Al, I do have to say that, I don't know about you, you're going to say you didn't pay attention, but every day as that recount was going on, people were like, oh my God, it's been 5 months and this is still going on. And I kept looking at the calendar and I'm like, do they get to July? Because if they don't get to July, they don't know what a long recount is.
Right. We're talking about my recount.
Which is still the longest. So this one, people thought that this was the longest, not the longest.
And my recount was long just because they kept suing.
Yeah.
They kept, and Minnesota judges are very patient.
Correct. That's right. I remember, I think I've told this story before. At one point, I think we were in chambers, or a sidebar, and one of the judges said, look, Mr. Elias, we'd rather get it done right than get it done fast. And I said, Your Honor, you're in no danger of getting it done fast. Like that is like fast is no longer on the table. So you might as well get it done right.
Oh, that was very kind of you.
I don't think the judge thought it was kind.
No, you thought it was sarcastic?
Correct, which maybe it was.
It feels like we've been seeing an increase in law enforcement being involved in roughing up Democratic office holders. We saw the videos of Senator Padilla getting roughed up and handcuffed, and Brad Lander the same by, I guess it was ICE agents in both cases.
Yep.
In New Jersey, they arrested the mayor of Newark and have indicted Representative LaMonica McIver for allegedly assaulting, resisting, impeding, and interfering of federal officers, even though it's all on tape.
Yeah, I know, that's the amazing part.
And it doesn't look like any of that at all. It looks like she's being pushed around as much as anyone. What is this all about?
So I think it's Donald Trump doing exactly what he said he would do. He said that he was going to seek revenge against his political opponents. Like that's what he did. I mean, his FBI director wrote a children's book in which Donald Trump is the benevolent king. His FBI director wrote a different book which contains in its appendix an enemies list, literally entitled Enemies List. Like Pam Bondi in 2020 came to everyone's attention because she was an election denier after the election was over.
That is pretty amazing. During her confirmation hearings, the fact that she was an election denier she still got confirmed.
Oh yeah, she still got confirmed. You know, they all got confirmed. I mean, Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense, Al.
I gotcha.
I mean, you know, it's sometimes hard to know, like, where do you go with the craziest? Is it Pete Hegseth at Defense, Pam Bondi at Justice? Is it Tulsi Gabbard at DNI? Is it Kennedy, you know, in HHS?
Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem for honorable mention.
I love when she showed up at CCOT. Is that the name of the prison in El Salvador?
Yes.
Looking elegant, standing in front of that cell with these poor guys. Jesus Christ. Those are guys sent to with no due process at all, right?
None. You could imagine a cruel and terrible system in which people are sent to a foreign gulag by mistake, you know, or people who are not guilty of anything get sent by mistake, or get sent, in the case of Kilmar Obrego Garcia, get sent in violation of a court order. Like, you can imagine that happening, but there being an administration that says, you know what, we're going to correct the mistakes. When we make a mistake, we're actually going to correct them. Yeah, we're going to keep sending people who are the worst of the worst to these, you know, foreign places. But where we make a mistake, we're going to be prompt in correcting it. What's really so, out of bounds and so beyond the pale is that when they make a mistake, they double down and triple down and quadruple down. And that's why you had the court in Maryland issuing this order saying we need 48 hours. We need 48 hours just to make sure that before you send people away, we have a chance to look at this.
And then they sued them all.
And they sued the judges. Again, to be clear, they didn't appeal the order. They sued the judges. I mean, can you imagine, Al, if when I was representing you in your recount, if I was like, okay, so we got a ruling we didn't like. We have two choices here, Al. We can either appeal it or we can just sue the judges. Like, that isn't a thing. You don't get to just be like, you know what, we don't like the judges, so we're suing you.
We also saw Trump deploy the National Guard and the Marines in Los Angeles. The district judge there, Charles Breyer, ruled against Trump's use of the Guard. And then the Ninth Circuit ruled for Trump. What do you suppose was going on there? What was the circuit thinking?
So I think that the most dangerous legal doctrine that almost no one has heard of today is something called the presumption of regularity. Okay. This has a long history. It really developed most strongly and continues this day from the Roosevelt administration. Roosevelt was dealing with a national emergency. He had, an economic depression that he had to deal with. He had growing war threats abroad. And so the courts adopted this presumption that when the president and the administration tell a court a fact, it is presumed to be true. When the administration or the Department of Justice say that that they did something for a good reason, the judges say, okay, we're going to assume that they did it for a good reason. In other words, it's called the presumption of regularity, but you could think of it as a presumption of good faith. That when a president like Roosevelt in the middle of the Great Depression says, I need to do this thing because it is what is in the best interest of the American people, courts should start with the presumption that he's on the up and up. It doesn't mean they don't do inquiry, but they start with the idea that if he says there's a really good reason to do something, there probably is.
So you're saying the court gave him that presumption?
Correct. But it's not just in that case. In all of these cases, the courts are acting like somehow Donald Trump is a normal president. They are acting like he is somehow saying, I need the National Guard because there is some grave emergency. And if I don't get the National Guard, there is a risk of a rebellion or an insurrection or something terrible. And so the courts are like, okay, well, the president of the United States is saying this, so we're going to assume, we're going to give him every benefit of the doubt. And I just think, honestly, that is misreading where we are in this country. And frankly, it is turning the U.S. Constitution into a suicide pact for democracy.
I want to ask you about autocracy and where we are in getting there. What actions by Trump and his administration have made you fear that we are headed to an autocracy? Or are we already there?
Yeah. So look, I think that you can put his actions into three categories that I think are the most dangerous. The first is in early January, before he took office, he said, we're going to deploy extraordinary measures to make sure that the worst of the worst are not on the streets. They are deported. His immigration plan was, we're going after the murderers, the rapists, the worst of the worst.
Right.
As we record this, he is now saying maybe we need to send U.S. citizens abroad. He said that earlier.
He said that?
Yeah. Right.
U.S. citizens.
Yeah. We have gone from the worst of the worst to not the worst of the worst, but people who are here without status, people who are here are migrants, to refusing to bring back people who were erroneously sent abroad, to U.S. citizens. There was a 4-year-old cancer patient who was deported. We have other instances of U.S. citizens.
She was deported with the mother, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But he's a U.S. citizen. He's entitled to not be deported.
Did they ask the mother or did they ask the 4-year-old? I mean, the 4-year-old isn't in a real position to make that decision, and the mom maybe wanted to.
I think there is a question. I think there is a real question as to whether or not the mother consented. And I think that it is part of the problem that we have from this administration, that we cannot believe what it says. And so I think there's some dispute among the family as to what happened there. But let me go to the next one. We now have masked, heavily militarized individuals grabbing people off the street. And so these people are being disappeared. We don't even know if they're being disappeared by members of the federal government or just by people who are cosplaying, like, in this role. And so I am very, very worried that what started with something that I didn't agree with, but which millions of Americans thought was sensible immigration policy, is spiraling into something else. We have Marines on the streets of a large city, right? We have National Guard being federalized over the objection of the governor. And we're only 5 months into this administration. So I think that's the first thing. The second is, I do think that their attack on judges and their attacks on the courts and the contemptuous behavior they're showing, I think that is a real risk as well. And then finally, the attacks on the large institutions. The media has not bathed itself in glory. The law firms have not bathed themselves in glory. The universities, the jury's still out. Corporate America has not bathed itself in glory. I mean, watching the billionaires fly and, throw money at Donald Trump around his inauguration didn't exactly inspire confidence that the business community is going to stand up. So I worry that aspects of civil society are also not up to the tasks.
How about just the corruption that you see?
The corruption is off the charts.
I mean, his meme coin, where people could cozy up to him by buying millions of dollars in his coin and go to a dinner and ask for favors later, right?
Right. I mean, what people who don't know about crypto and meme coins need to understand is a meme coin, by definition, is valueless. Like it is a joke, right? They began as joke coins. It was like, right? But they don't have any value. So people who are buying his meme coin are either being lied to and suckered and misled and defrauded, right? That's like category one. Or they're billionaires who just want to put money in his pocket and get something in return, but not in the coin. And so, look, he's hawking perfume. He's hawking, phones, right? I mean, doing these while president of the United States from the White House.
And he does these things like if you want to have dinner with him at Mar-a-Lago, you can pay $1 million and have dinner with him in a group, or $5 million if you want to have dinner with him alone at Mar-a-Lago. And a mother who paid $1 million for one of those dinners got her son off for tax evasion.
Yeah. I mean, look, we could have a whole episode just about the abuse of the pardon power. The way he uses the pardon power does not resemble like anything has ever been used before. He has used it to cherry pick individuals who have some political connection or some personal connection that makes no sense. And of course, he did a mass pardon of those convicted of crimes in connection with January 6th. All of them. Remember, this was another thing. We were told, don't worry. You Democrats, you're oversensitive. You're overreacting to this. He's not going to pardon the violent people. He's just going to pardon the people who got caught up, walking into the Capitol. He pardoned all of them.
Yeah, including the most violent. And we had a number of those Capitol cops die in the wake of that.
Yeah.
Well, the midterms will decide whether Democrats have a check on Trump.
I think that's right, because ultimately, J.B. Raskin, the congressman from Maryland, and I always give him credit for this. He said to me, Mark, first of all, we don't have three co-equal branches of government. Co-equal is not a word. Okay. The word is equal. Number two, the founders didn't intend them to all be equal. They intended the legislative branch to be the most powerful. They intended Congress to be the check. There's a reason why Congress can impeach and convict. There's a reason why Congress can do that for judges. There's a reason why Congress is the only body empowered to declare war. It's the reason why appropriations and taxes have to originate in Congress. The president can't just do these things by themselves. But the problem is John Thune and Mike Johnson have completely ceded their constitutional prerogatives to the White House. So there's no functioning Congress in Republican control. It's just another arm of the White House.
Is that when the Supreme Court said there'll be no nationwide injunctions?
Yes.
Well, when they said that was kind of a way of basically taking power away from all the district courts, right? And giving just to the Supreme Court.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. I'd say it's giving power first and foremost to the president. But yes, relative within the court system, it is giving power to the Supreme Court.
And it's giving power to the president because if these are his executive orders and Congress doesn't stand up to them, then these executive orders can be confirmed by the Supreme Court.
But also, and I always point this out whenever I get into discussion of the Supreme Court with anyone on the left, on the right, and center, whatever, the Supreme Court hears, on average, 70 cases a year.
Mm-hmm.
70. The district courts are dealing with hundreds of thousands of cases. And so by neutering the ability of the district courts to do these things, it is not just the consolidation of power to the Supreme Court. It is really actually giving power to the president, because a lot of these cases will never get to the Supreme Court.
Of course. Well, that's a really good point. And that's where they did a number on our system.
Now, I do have to tell you, Al, I did have one moment of levity in all of this terribleness. So I'm not a policy expert, as you know. But as far as I can tell, Ted Cruz wanted to ban states from regulating AI. And so he put together a bill or ban states from regulating artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So he put in place an amendment for this reconciliation bill that would do that. As far as I can tell, it's like there aren't a lot of things the Republicans said no to other Republican senators about, but even they rejected this, like thereby proving that once again, Ted Cruz, like I'm not even sure I understand what the political judgment that Ted Cruz was trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
Like why would that ever be popular? It wound up going down, I think, 99-1 in the final vote in the Senate.
Wow. Good for him. A brave man stands head above everyone else in the crowd. Ted Cruz. It's all going to be the midterm now, and I don't think this bill that was just got passed and the House will vote for it, right?
Of course, the House will vote for it. I thought the most revealing thing in all of it was Tom Tillis, who, after he announced he was not running for re-election, put out a press release that basically said, "Now I'm going to be able to vote my conscience." It's like, wait a second, wait. Were you supposed to be doing that like all along? like, you know what I mean?
What was going on? Yeah, that's amazing. Why would he do that? Oh well. Yeah. Well, that's a problem, isn't it?
It is. It is among the litany of problems we have in our country right now.
And Democracy Docket is doing swimmingly.
Yeah, Democracy Docket is doing great. I started it in 2020 because I thought that there needed to be a pro-democracy source of information about what's happening in the courts and in Congress and everywhere around voting and elections and democracy issues generally. We are now up to 425,000 daily subscribers get our newsletters.
Wow.
We have a YouTube channel with 450,000 subscribers on YouTube. It turns out every time.
No, I'm a member.
Well, thank you. Every time the Washington Post does something preposterously terrible, Democracy Docket gains more subscribers.
And it's just a reaction to.
I think that the legacy media can be faulted for a lot of things. The thing that I least understand is how little it knows about its own consumers. Like at this point, I don't even understand who CNN thinks it is appealing to. Like, I don't understand why the Washington Post, other than Jeff Bezos, may not care about the money. Like, who do they think is reading their newspaper? Like, when they decided, like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to cancel our endorsement of Kamala Harris. Who did they think that decision was going to appeal to? Because it's not people who are paying to subscribe to the Washington Post.
Well, Bezos was planning on donating $1 million to the inaugural. So.
Yeah, and he didn't care. And I think that you're seeing a new era of media ownership where they don't really care about the publications, their money. They make their money elsewhere. You know what I mean? Like Jeff Bezos makes his money doing things other than selling Washington Post subscriptions. And I think that's true for Disney with ABC. It's true with Sherry Redstone and CBS. I think that you're seeing more and more the old families that revered these assets for the work they did, but also they saw the need for them to have integrity for business purposes. I just think has really changed. And it's meant that there's a new emergent ecosystem of media companies, that are, benefiting in that space. And you saw a lot of that in the past in the right-wing media ecosystem where there are Steve Bannons and all of those. And I mean, look, you and I have been literally having this conversation for 20 years, I think.
Something like that.
When before Air America, there was a concern that the Republicans had built an alternative media ecosystem, and
it was Rush and
Hannity.
And Gingrich was in office, but he was part of that.
Yeah, I remember I had summer jobs in the 90s, the 80s, actually. Now that I think about it, I had summer jobs. I was a lawyer in the 90s. I had summer jobs in the 80s that involved driving other people's cars. It was like at a car rental agency and then at an auto dealer, like basically ferrying cars. And everyone was listening to the one station that had Rush Limbaugh followed by Sean Hannity. And there was another guy, Bob Grant, I think his name was, in New York, who was also part of that. And Democrats thought, we have this enormous problem, and there were efforts to try to correct that. And I think that now you're seeing there is a real effort again to try to build a more sustainable left of center media ecosystem. Your podcast is, enormously influential and successful. And that's, I think, a part of it. You were, by the way, I think the only commercially successful part of it in the last go around. Hopefully you have more company this time. But the legacy media is not doing itself any favors right now.
Yeah. Okay, well, here's to the midterms. That's our hope, I guess, right? And I think this bill is going to be a motivation for a lot of Americans to switch sides.
I'm hoping from your mouth to God's ears. I hope so.
All right, you heard it. My mouth to God's ears. Thanks, Mark. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.